Right, my name is Jae An. I'm the Director of Academic Counseling Services here at mekreview. I have Ms. Rachel Irwin here, our Dean of Faculty.
One of the first things that we wanted to bring to your attention is this breaking news from Dartmouth, right? That they're going to reinstate standardized test requirements for the class of 2029. And here's just some highlights of the things that they said, right? One of the things they said is our analysis shows that we potentially miss out on some great applications when we don't have test scores. Applicants that did not submit scores, some applicants didn't submit scores when their scores could have helped them, maybe tripling their chance of admissions. Another thing that they said was, one of the other things they said was that students who are really excelling in a less than perfect environment, that's something that they take into account. So we just wanted to highlight this thing about Dartmouth because honestly, it's a way that other schools might quickly take this lead and reinstate some of their test specific requirements.
As Ms. Rachel was just saying, Dartmouth has reinstated their test requirements. And if we actually go on to the next slide, we can see that there are a lot of Ivy League schools. We point out Ivy Leagues because they are the most noticeable, but a lot of Ivy League schools that are bringing back SAT requirements or considering it. And so you'll see here, Yale considering bringing it back within the next few weeks. Brown University, they're developing a stance on those requirements, as well as I'm sure that all of you know to some extent about legacy admissions, early decision, about affirmative action, all these things that have been changing within the last year. Brown is kind of developing that stance right now. Harvard has extended their test optional policy, but actually you'll see that Harvard, Princeton, Cornell, these schools, they've just been increasing year by year. So they're really seeing how it goes and then kind of developing their statement year by year. So we really don't know when that test optional policy will be going away and going back to test required. Columbia University is actually one school that declared that they'd be permanently test optional. And so you'll see that there are certain schools that also have committed to becoming completely test blind, the UCs for one, Amherst College. All these different very, very prestigious colleges have also been committing in that direction, but not as many as those that are test optional. And of course, now going back into test required. Cornell, I just wanted to point out, however, that it depends. So depending on the college that we're applying to, so whether that is the College of Agricultural Life Sciences or College of Arts and Sciences, that test optional policy is going to be different. If we're applying into art, architecture, hotel administration, then even if we send in those scores, they're not going to see them. However, for test optional schools, if you do send them in, it will also help you. Shall we? Right. So yes, what does that mean for my student? What does that mean for me? What that means is that we want to make that option available for us. What Mrs. An and I often say to a lot of college counseling students is that, if we have the SAT score and we can choose not to use that, that's a very different stance from being in a position where you don't have the score. And so now we can't apply to schools that are required, right? Because we just don't have that requirement with us. What that also means is that a lot of students are going to be looking at the digital SAT with a lot more, let's say, urgency. A lot more students will be looking at that as, I need to take this. This is a requirement now. So let's just go into the digital SAT and what to expect. So this March, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's around March 9th.
March 9th.
Yep. March 9th is going to be our first official digital SAT. Starting March 9th, there will be no more paper-based option for most students. The only students that a paper-based option will really be available for are students that have that specific learning accommodations. So that specific IEP, that specific, accommodation for them. So very few. All students will be taking their SATs on their own laptops or on their school provided laptops. And then of course, for this truncated time of 2 hours and 14 minutes versus the old one of 3 hours and 15 minutes. There are 2 modules of English/reading, which is our combined section, and Ms. Rachel's going to go into that in a lot more detail soon. And so that's going to be a total of 54 questions for a total of 64 minutes. So that's divided among the 2 modules. 2 modules of math, very similar, but 44 total questions, 70 total minutes. So once again, there's a bit of a truncated time there. There is a 10-minute break allotted between reading/writing and math. And because this is a digital test, it's actually students who are finishing early, they can also go into their breaks early, they can finish their breaks earlier. So it actually ends up being a little bit more flexible, I guess, in that time. Technical details. So if we're taking the March SAT in 3 weeks, then these are the things that we definitely need to know, and these are the things that we definitely need to prepare in advance. Calculators are allowed on both math modules. Some of you may know about the calculator requirements. There's a whole list of accepted calculators that you can find on the College Board, but to give you the brief, it's scientific calculators for the most part. I think that's just kind of across the board. And then for graphing calculators, we have TI 88s, TI Inspires, TI 89s, and I think that's about it. I would have to take a look at the full list as well. But if you are worried that your calculator is not eligible, then you can actually look it up on collegeboard.org. If you don't have a graphing calculator, you can also use the built-in calculator on the computer. So within the Blue Book application, which I'm going to be talking about next, there is going to be an on-screen one that students can use, just kind of clicking around. Students should bring their own laptops to take the digital SAT and download the Blue Book app from College Board at least 1 week before. And I say at least because that's College Board's recommendations. MEK's recommendation is as soon as you register for that SAT, you should know how that Blue Book app works, because that is how you are going to take the test. There are 4 practice tests on Blue Book. So if you're able to take a test beforehand, get yourself situated with all the different functions on the Blue Book application, then you'll just be going in with so much more experience, so much. Students who cannot bring their own laptops, however, you have 2 different options. You can borrow a device from the school or from College Board, but you must request it at least 30 days in advance. There are some students who will, be 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, and realize that they don't have a working laptop. Maybe, there's something wrong with it. You can also borrow a friend's laptop, and so that's also an option that you can explore. Of course, this might be common sense, but just so that we're going over everything, students must bring their own laptop chargers, make sure that it doesn't turn down, it doesn't shut off during the test. And you will be connecting to the school's internet network throughout the entire duration of the test. So these are kind of the technical details. Once again, if you're taking it in March, you really need to have all these things ready. All right, next slide, please. In terms of Blue Book, the Blue Book app is actually a very interesting one, and I think Miss Rachel can actually attest to a lot more. But there are these really, really cool features that can be used during the test towards your favor. And so you really, really should be situated very, very familiar with all of these different functions. Miss Rachel, could you?
Yeah. So luckily, Blue Book offers a couple practice tests for kids so that they can get used to this, like how to use this app. And actually at MEK, as part of our curriculum at set times, we have students actually go and do the practice test on Blue Book, because we want them to get familiar with this app and make sure they don't have any problems before the testing starts. And one of the things we ask them after they've used Blue Book is, how'd you like it? Like, did you like the features? Was it easy to use? And so far, we've gotten really good notes from students. They seem to find it intuitive. They like it. This first thing we have here, mark for review, was actually one thing that a lot of students mentioned that they really liked about it, that you can flag questions and then you can return to them later without having to like scroll back, right? A lot of them, the testing timer is up there. So a lot of them like to have that up there. They like to see it so they can know, if they're hitting their time management goals, if they're staying on target. But if it's something that just causes you a little more, like too much anxiety to have that constant countdown happening, then there's also the option to hide the timer and then just get an alert when you have 5 minutes left. As Ms. Jahi already mentioned, there's a built-in graphing calculator that's available, but students are still allowed to have their own calculator as long as it's one of the approved College Board calculators. There's a reference sheet. This is very similar to the paper version where there was a reference sheet in paper. Now there's just, a reference sheet digitally, but it has like common formulas, students might need on the math section. And then the other major thing is that it does allow for students to annotate, where they can highlight. It gives them an option to actually like highlight and type if they want to make a note next to something. So they can do that as well. Of course, the passages are pretty short, so most students that I've talked to don't make a lot of use of that annotation feature, but it is there for students who need it. Good news is, if those of you used to old paper SAT, same scoring. It's out of 1,600, 800 for reading, writing, 800 for math. You add it together, you get 1,600. Also similar to old SAT, no penalty for guessing, meaning a wrong answer and a blank answer are treated the same. There's none of that minus a fourth for a wrong answer. So of course at MEK, we always tell students, answer everything, right? Guess on everything, because you at least have a shot then. Super scores can combine sections from current SAT and digital SAT. So if you do have a child or a student who took the older paper version and now they want to try the new version, the digital version, and see if they can increase their scores, they do have the option to take from both. And then of course, students always want to know about score cancellation, like what happens, anxiety gets to me, I bomb on the test day, do I have to keep that score? You do not. You can actually cancel your score immediately after the test. You can ask your on-site proctor to do it. You also, if you decide later, maybe you go home and you decide, I don't think I did my best, I want to cancel, you have up to 1 week to decide to cancel your score. However, if you cancel your score, you never get it. So you don't get to ever see it. You can't uncancel it. So it's kind of like a finite thing if you do end up canceling your score there.
Yeah. If we just kind of go over one thing, I know a lot of students, they have a lot of anxiety about too many tests on their record. So of course, there are certain schools, it's not that many, but a few schools where they will see or they will ask for all of your test scores. Some kind of more popular schools that have that are Georgetown, Carnegie Mellon, Cornell. I believe, yes, for those kind of top schools, we have those. We have a few state schools, mostly kind of in the Midwest and South. So we have Texas, some Texas state schools, some Florida state schools. I've noticed a lot of Christian schools, not necessarily Catholic schools like Boston College or Villanova, but actually the Christian Methodist and those Methodist, Presbyterian, Lutheran schools, universities have also been asking for them. And then finally, if anyone is going to apply to historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, they generally ask for all of your scores. However, if you're not applying to any of these schools or only maybe one or two of them, we do recommend that you take the test multiple times without too much of a concern that, oh, there's going to be 2 scores that I have to send in, 3 scores that I have to send in. College Board does not limit you of how many tests that you can take. The only limitation that you have is really yourself. And then also, how many tests, if we are applying to Georgetown, if we're applying to Carnegie Mellon, how many tests do we want to show them? But in the end, when they do receive it, they are super scoring it by themselves, which we can go into a little bit more detail. And they are looking at the best performance only. All right, so that's all to say, take it as many times as you need.
Yes.
Granted, each test takes a lot of prep. Each test takes a lot of practice. And so take as many as your stamina can endure, and then also your physical timeline. Not every student has a full year to do test prep. Some students will only have 3 months, some students will only have 6 months. Then how are we going to make the most of it? And then that's something that we can talk about in just a little bit.
Yeah. No, but I couldn't agree more. I think the number one thing to consider when you're thinking about how many tests should I take is not like, oh, there's some kind of cap. There isn't a cap, but to think about your own prep and how much time you have to dedicate to it. So yeah. So moving on to like the biggest highlight, the biggest new thing about SAT, this is the juicy one, the one that really is different, is that the new digital SAT is a multi-stage adaptive test. So what does this mean? Basically, as we were talking about in the initial layout, right? Reading and writing has 2 modules. Math has 2 modules. On the first module that the student takes for each subject, it will determine what second module they go to, right? So their performance on that first module basically will determine, do they go to an easier second module or a harder second module, right? Now, you might think, well, is there some kind of strategic benefit to going to the easier second module, right? Because then you ace that and maybe you get a higher score overall. No, unfortunately, College Board accounts for that. And if a student misses a certain amount on the first module and they get taken to that easier second module, their score is capped because the harder questions count for more points. So basically what this means is that you have to be accurate, and to really maximize your score, you have to get to that harder second module. So I think, this graphic here that maybe Ms. Jahi wants to go into a little more can really kind of maybe help clarify what this looks like.
Yes, so this is just to visualize it all. I'm a very visual person, so I always kind of need a little bit of a map here. There is a little bit more of a weighting system on the questions on the digital SAT. And so definitely the more difficult questions are being more weighed more heavily. And of course, like we said, there's no guessing penalty. But when we think about this, we can think about it being 2 routes. So there is the more difficult and the less difficult module 1 and 2. Then usually the less difficult module, so students who don't do as well on the module 1, let's say that they cap it at maybe, for example, students who get 80% or less of the questions correct on module 1 will be routed to the less difficult module 2. Students who get, of course, 81% and on, correct on module 1, then they will get the more difficult module 2. Now, the former, so the students who get the less difficult module 2, they will generally be capped at something around a 650, and I think it differs based on the test and the overall difficulty of the test, but around a 600 to 650 versus an 800. So if we, let's say, get the less difficult module for both math and English, really the highest we could probably get is going to be something like a 1300 or a little less than that. So around a 1200 to 1300 versus someone who gets everything correct on module 1, and then the more difficult version of module 2, and the highest score that they could get is an 800 on both, so a 1600. Now, what does that mean? I'll go into what the different scores look like for some of the more top colleges, so you have a little bit better of an idea of what those mean in relation. Yep. So I wanted to go over a little bit of the test content. We won't spend too much time here just because there's a lot of very technical information here. But in terms of math, it's very, very clear cut now. We have exactly 15, 15, 7, 7 of these 4 different objectives. So you'll see what those objectives look like here. It says currently, that means on the paper-based SAT. So what used to be called Heart of Algebra is just algebra. What used to be Passport to Advanced Math is just advanced math. I think we received this question before the webinar, but in terms of what topics that were not as heavily tested on the paper-based SAT, but now are, we actually have a lot more geometry and trigonometry. In terms of that, before it used to be kind of grouped into this big bubble called additional topics. So that was kind of like the more advanced topics, a little bit more miscellaneous, can't really be sorted into one of the other 3 buckets. But now that entire additional topic section is just geometry and trigonometry. So we'll see a lot of more shapes, a lot more volume and area type of questions there. Maybe we can move forward. Yes.
Yeah, so I always laugh with my math colleagues because, you know, they talk about that the questions changed, altered slightly, right? Like there's things that were changed, there's things that are different when it comes to digital SAT math. For English, it's more like a completely different test. It's like, it's not a little tweaks and little differences here. It's very, very different. One of the biggest differences, of course, is between the old paper-based and the new digital is that instead of having these long passages of about 700 words and then having like 10 to 12 questions about one passage, every question gets its own passage. And those passages are much shorter, of course. They're like 25 to 150 words. So about the size of a paragraph, a small paragraph. Another thing is that there's no more, this is a reading section and this is the writing section. They're combined. However, the questions, just like math, go in order. So you know, okay, about here, I'm going to start getting the writing questions. About here, I'm going to start getting these types of questions. And we teach students, you know, how to play that order to their advantage. But it goes in the same order. So even though it's not split, you still kind of know when to expect. It's not all jumbled together. You're going to know when to expect the different ones. Another big change is, I would say, that the reading questions became a lot more vocabulary centric, especially those hard questions that you need to get right in order to maximize your score. A lot of times that's going to come down more to vocab, right? Either because of the vocabulary in the answer choices, but also the kind of advanced vocab used in the passages themselves. Other big things is, as far as the question domains go, information, ideas, craft, and structure, a lot of that does overlap with old SAT, things that like are kind of evergreen, right? Main idea, purpose, right? Word and context. Those are skills that are still tested, just in a radically different format kind of thing. And then for the passages, those also are different, not just because they're shorter, but they added a couple new passages. Like for example, now they test poetry, and they never did that before. So kids can expect to get a few poems. Also drama, little excerpts from plays were never on the old SAT, but now they can expect to also deal with that as well.
All right, so I'm not too sure how many people here are planning on taking the March SAT. There might be a few, but we do receive this question sometimes. I'm taking the March SAT and I haven't prepared much. So once again, we're 3 weeks out, right? What can I do now to make the most difference in my score? Of course, we start this question with the acknowledgement that it'll be very difficult to make any big significant improvement on your test score within the next 3 weeks, just because of the sheer amount of time that we have, especially if you're approaching the test with minimal test prep experience, excuse me. If you're approaching it with quite a bit of test prep experience and we're 3 weeks out, then we're in a completely different situation. But if we're starting from a blank slate, we're just kind of thinking, let's give it a shot. You know, it's a new test. It's a different format of a test. I just want to give it a shot. Then these are a few tips. We're going to go into a few tips about how to make the most difference within the next 3 weeks. And then, of course, how to plan for after that.
So yeah, like Ms. J, he said 3 weeks is an incredibly short amount of time, but there are a few things that you can do to try to make your score better in that time. So one of the things I would say for English is you have to take at least a few practice exams before then. Even if you're like, I just kind of want to try this out, I just kind of want to see what this is all about, that's fine, but don't make the first time you ever take this test when you're sitting down to take the official one. Don't do that. It's gonna throw you off so much. Your score is not gonna be, it's not gonna be worth it for you to take it, right? So you need to at least fit in a few practice exams before then so that you can start getting your time management down. You can start understanding what this test is, what it requires, right? We don't want our first attempt to be the official test. The other thing I said is, like, this is a more vocab centric test. So with this kind of short tier time, one thing that you can do to try to maximize your score in a very short time is hit vocab hard, right? So really start looking at those upper vocab words, start studying them. If you take a few practice tests, make a list of the words from the tests that you didn't know and start studying those as well. The other thing that you can do is there are still questions that just strip for the writing that test straight up grammar. And it has been my experience as an English teacher that when you have a short amount of time, you got to kind of go for the low hanging fruit. Where can I improve my score the most in the quickest amount of time? Well, that's grammar, right? Because a lot of the other questions are skill based and it takes a while sometimes to develop those skills. But grammar is about rules. Memorize the rules, take a few practice tests to learn how to apply the rules, and you can actually see a significant jump in your grammar score. So that's something that in a short amount of time would be worth it to really focus on. Let me get all these grammar rules down so I can at least get all of the grammar questions correct.
Yeah, on the math side, and this is taken directly from our math teachers, ensure proficiency in utilizing necessary formulas. So there are quite a few formulas that you do need to know for the SAT. And those formula questions are kind of like the vocabulary and grammar questions of the English, a lot more low-hanging fruit, things that you can really hone by practicing them. So practice tackling similar questions repetitively so you can definitely handle various applications of the same formulas. The formulas won't come up at the same way for each time. So kind of figuring out what are the different ways that I might be seeing on the official test, so you're not surprised. Familiarize yourself extensively with your calculator. Your calculator has amazing graphing capabilities, especially if you have a graphing calculator. If you're able to do that, if you're able to spend some time kind of studying what your graphing calculator can do for you, then that will be an amazing tool for you. And finally, and this goes into a little bit of our next point, but register for the next test. If you only had 3 weeks to prepare for March, then it's only natural for us to think, okay, when can I do better? When can I have a lot more time to prep for the next test? Mind you, May is also the month of AP exams. So if you think that, preparing for the AP exams and preparing for the SAT together is going to be too difficult, then let's plan even further. Let's think about June. Let's think about August. So if we can buy ourselves more time, then that's even better. It's very common, like I said earlier, for students to take multiple attempts at the test. And you can use number one, score choice for a lot of schools. Most schools have score choice. I want to say about, if I just give you kind of a ballpark number, maybe about 60 to 70% of the schools that you will be looking at utilize score choice. The other, I want to say 20%, 20 to 25% use super score. What that means is that we can take the highest math score that we've ever gotten and the highest English score that we've ever gotten and combine them into one composite score. So these are from different administrations of the test. The good news for our students right now is that we're in the perfect kind of middle generation of this test in that you can super score a paper-based SAT and a digital SAT. So if we got an 800, let's say, on the math in December, when we were taking it on paper, and then we get a 780, let's say, on English, just random numbers right now, then we can combine those two into one composite score. So we're kind of in a really good place right now. When we're preparing for the next test also, we do want to make sure that we're setting up everything that we can for success. And so we'll go into that in just a few minutes in terms of test date tips. And I'll just go through them, and then Ms. Rachel, if you could add in anything else that we're missing here, but keep your scrap paper neat. And this actually is something that not many people think about. Scrap paper is considered scrap. You throw them out at the very end of the test. But because the test is going to be digital, your scrap paper is going to be very essential for you to be actually doing those solving things. So it's going to serve as that platform for displaying your work. And it's really crucial to have a clear understanding of your calculations when it comes to math to expedite the process when reviewing your answers later. So we're not resolving things when we're reviewing the test. It's not necessary and it's not expected for them to be aesthetically beautiful, but ensure that at least for you that they are legible and organized for easy reference. And then don't stress about the difficult questions, especially when we're taking it in March. And we're not approaching this with a crazy amount of test prep experience. Don't stress about the difficult questions. Remain calm, because number one, if you aren't calm, then even the simple questions we're going to make mistakes on. But if we remain calm, then we can do the best that we can. Just do your best, even if it means that you have to guess. Like we said, there's no guessing penalty. Rather than stressing over the difficult questions, concentrate on avoiding careless errors on the questions you are confident in solving. So let's invest where we'll have the most return. And then, of course, as we do more prep, we can work on those difficult questions so that they end up being these easy questions you can do your best on during your next test. Ms. Rachel, is there anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, I think, just normal test day tips that I always give students is like, if you're a lot of students take the test at their own high school. So that's great. You're familiar with the terrain. But if you're going to a different high school or a different testing center, make sure that you get there early enough that you don't feel panicked. Like, where am I supposed to be? What room? What's room 104? Just those kind of normal things, like get there on time, right? Have your laptop, have your charger, make sure you downloaded Blue Book. And then just to piggyback on what you said about difficult questions, it's not just about, where you want to expend your energy. It's about where you want to expend your time. So if you get too stressed out about the difficult questions, you sink too much time into them. And that is one of the reasons why other questions that you maybe should have got right, you'll make careless errors because you're rushing. So just keep that in mind. And again, it goes back to those features we talked about that Blue Book does offer, where you can flag questions. So if a question's difficult, just flag it, move on, make sure you have enough time to answer the questions you're confident about, come back, do your best guess, whatever you can with those questions that you flagged.
Thank you. All right, so like I was saying, let's plan for after March. If we're taking the March test, well, even for students who are taking this after a considerable amount of prep, it's a new test, right? It's a completely different one from the paper-based one from December and earlier than that. And so it is very possible that when we come out of this test, we might think, oh, that wasn't my best performance. So what do we do from here? 3 big steps. So number one, set a goal score. Number two, set a test prep plan. And number three, practice, practice, practice. So when we do this, if I give you a very concrete timeline, I want to say within the week after your March test, you will know. You will know how you feel that you did. And then also there are so many different kind of resources out there for you to figure out kind of, okay, I think I probably got however many questions wrong or right. We can think about that. So spend that week kind of thinking about that. Don't agonize over it, but do think about it. And then let's plan for the future. Let's set the goal score first. So what score should I aim for? Now here we're going to talk about 2 different types of scores, a predicted score and then a goal score. So let's start off with the predicted score.
Yeah. So when you're taking, as Mr. He said, the last thing we're going to talk about is practice, practice, practice. So before you take the test again, March, it's around the corner. Again, take a few practice tests. But if you're aiming for May, if you're aiming for June, if later you're aiming for August, you're going to take a lot of practice tests before that comes up. So if you want to think about, okay, what is my predicted score? You don't want to look at necessarily the last test you took. So if you're like, okay, I took this test right before I went in and took May, that's the score I'm going to get. It's every test has its own curve, has its own difficulty level, right? It's just not going to be the best predictor to look at one data point. So what we always recommend at MEK is really to look at your last 5 tests or at least your last 3 tests. And you want to kind of think about the average score, and that is really your predictive score. Another thing is even though we talk about predictive scores, like, okay, if you take this average, that's a good like predictive score to have. One thing I always tell my students is you really should think of your score as having a ceiling and a floor, right? So ceiling is on my worst day, I do this. It's floor, sorry. Floor is on the worst day, I do this. Ceiling is on my best day, I do this. So this is my lowest score. This is my highest score. And then as you're prepping, you work to move both. You work to where even when you're having your worst day, you never get below this. And when you're having your best day, you get even higher. So that's another way when you're looking at your last 5 tests, not only the average, but you can look at the range. What's my floor? What's my ceiling?
Yeah. Now, that's a lot more of a, let's say, when we're in the prep process and a lot more practical, this is what we should expect type of, score. But on a college admission standpoint, now we also want to think about what is our goal score. For students who are approaching this, in the 10th grade or even in the 11th grade, really, we still have a lot of time until November, until December, January. And so let's set some goals. If we don't set a goal, then we will never know exactly where we need to be. And then it just ends up being a lot more difficult to make a lot of progress because that goal, that 1600, that 1590, it doesn't have a tangible, let's say, continued plan. What does that mean for me? We want to set that right now. So your goal score should always be the 75th percentile of the SAT score of the applicant pool within your dream university. And when I say that, it sounds very technical, but it's a very easy number for you to find. When you go into Google, let's say we are my dream college, I want to early decision to Columbia. We have a lot of students who early decision to Columbia. Then I will look up Columbia University Prep Scholar in my Google search bar. Prep Scholar is an amazing resource. They have a lot of blogs. They have a lot of different things where they actually analyze. They gather all the information from the news that the colleges actually release themselves. The information that is really hard to find on the college application or the college university website, they actually compile all of that into one very nicely organized kind of page. And so you'll see GPA, and then you'll also see SAT or ACT scores. And they will generally tell you the 75th percentile, unless they themselves can't find it, of course. The GPA is a little harder for you to kind of compare yourself to because every school calculates their GPA in a different way. Some schools are out of 5, some are 4, unweighted, weighted. I've had some students go to schools where it's calculated out of 7 or 100. So because of that, it's going to be a little difficult, but at least the SAT score is standardized. You'll see here, Princeton University's 75th percentile is a 1580, almost perfect. Columbia 1560, Harvard 1580. So you'll see that these are not 1600 because we're looking at the 75th percentile, but still very close to it. And so that's, if you're looking at any of these schools and you want to think, I want to be a shoo-in, of course, there is no shoo-in ever for a college or university, but I want to make sure that I am maximizing my chances there, then this is what you need to aim for. 1560, 1580. I think NYU I see here 1510, right? So we do have these. And yeah, this is really where you want to be. And then also what I tell a lot of students is write it down on a post-it and slap it on all the walls that you can, because when you can visualize your goal, then that's one big way that you can also reach that goal. After we set that goal, we want to set a test prep plan. Like we said, after March, there is May, there is June, there is August. We also have our October and November and December, right? So we have a whole year of tests. When we look at our test prep plan, we want to make sure that we are being realistic. So once again, are we taking AP tests in May? Are we having big finals in June? Then realistically, with you maintaining your GPA, which is also very important, is it going to be realistic for you to take those tests? I just want you to think about it. I want you to think about it and just think, what can I do without not sleeping, without not eating, and then without not studying for my actual classes? That might end up being August. For many students, it's August because the summer is a perfect time to just catch up on a lot of different things. But in either case, we have our spring courses here at MEK, we have our summer courses at MEK, and I think Ms. Rachel can go a little bit more into detail about that.
Right. So we have for SAT basically 3 levels, SAT Foundation, SAT 1400 and 1500. Just one quick note, because I know sometimes the title 1400 or 1500 can throw students or parents off. 1400 does not mean that students in that class are not being prepared to get over a 1400, or 1500 doesn't mean students in that class are not being prepared to go over a 1500. This has to do more with how we group students based on their initial eval. So for example, our first class SAT Foundation, it's 90 minutes for English and 90 minutes for math, so 3 hours total. It's throughout the week. There's different options. And what we focus on in Foundation, so these are for students who, when they initially take our eval, score below 1150 or around, below that initial cutoff. And what that tells us is that they need to work on some foundational skills before they're ready to just start taking a test every week. Because if they just take a test every week, it's just going to be overwhelming. We got to first work on these fundamental skills. The other thing is we focus specifically on module 1. So if you remember from earlier, in order to really maximize your score, you have to get to the harder module 2, right? But to get to the harder module 2, you have to do well on module 1. So in this class, we work on module 1, and every 3 weeks, we allow we in class take a practice test of module 1. And once students start getting the score they need to get in order to get to the hard module 2, we allow them to move out of Foundation and graduate into our 14 or 1500 class. And then in our 14 and 1500 class, students will take a weekly test. And then for 1400, it's 90 minutes English, 90 minutes math. And for 1500, it's 60 minutes English, 60 minutes math. So again, some students graduate from Foundation and they go into 1400. Another way students can get into 1400, again, is based on their evaluation at MEK. If they come in and their score is initially between 1150 and 1300, we will recommend 1400. If their score is 1300 or higher, we usually recommend 1500. And this is just to separate students so that we can work on key skill areas that they need at that level of scoring. But again, for both these students, what they can achieve is the limit. And we also have a lot of students from our 1400 class who end up going on and joining the 1500 class after their score improves a bit. So the biggest difference between the 14 and 1500 is we work a little bit more on targeted skills that they need, and 1500 is a little bit more holistic and comprehensive. So those are our primary offerings right now. And the 14 and 1500 classes take place on Saturday, where Foundation takes place throughout the week, the weekday.
Yeah. And also, once again, the summer is often a time for a lot of students to consider prep. Let's say school's just a little much right now. I know a lot of juniors feel like that right now. And so then don't worry about it. Don't worry about test prep until the summer then. The summer is when we have all 3 of these classes, 4 including SAT 1500 Advanced, which is something that we offer during the summer for students who want to kind of that last push, right? From let's say 1550 to 1580 or higher, a lot of students will take 1500 advanced. But in any case, these 3 courses will be offered 3 times a week. So within the 7 weeks, right, that of our summer, they'll actually get 21 lessons and also 21 tests. So that's actually very powerful. We'll be sending out more information about our SAT classes for the summer after this webinar. All right, so that's our test prep plan, right? Don't do it alone, first of all. And then also, a lot of students say, or a lot of parents also say, why isn't school enough, right? I already learn a lot of these things in school. I read and I write in school. I'm in calculus. Why isn't that enough? Because school doesn't prepare you for standardized tests. It's a very different muscle. It's a very different skill set. And also, you're learning much more different topics in school. So don't rely too much on the school stuff. But with that said, take an evaluation test. Take that first, see where you are, and then also see where you want to be. Now, with that, we want to practice. So practice, practice, practice. Ms. Rachel, how many tests should they take before their next SAT test?
So this depends a little bit on like where you're starting and where you want to go, but generally we're going to recommend that you should take 10 to 20, right? More toward the 20 for most students before you actually take your official test. So by taking, at least 10 tests upward, close to 20 tests, you're really gonna be able to get this test down, really feel like you can master it and practice the skills that you need to practice to the point where we always say practice towards perfection, right? So that, these things that you're never making a careless mistake. You're never making a careless error. These things that are harder, these skills that are harder, you're able to get that exposure to where you can really get them down. And just to like piggyback off what Ms. J. He said about, does my school prepare me? I used to be a public school teacher, and it was like anathema to me to teach to a test. I was trying to do something much deeper with students, right? You're trying to teach them how to be readers, how to be thinkers, how to analyze and write and be persuasive and articulate and thoughtful. You're trying to do like this much bigger thing as a English teacher in high school. But at MEK, we teach to the test. Not only do we teach to the test, we teach you the test. So it's not just about the content. We will teach you that, of course. We'll teach you content, we'll teach you skills, but we teach you like how the test thinks. Oh, the test likes to do this. They love this kind of trap answer. When they phrase a question like this is what they're looking for. So we actually teach you this specific test as well. So, and then you take a bunch, you take 10 to 20, and you're gonna feel like you could write the test yourself as well.
Yeah, I think our math teachers always say, you want to think like a test maker. That's one big slogan. And then also practice makes permanent. So those are kind of our MEK, what you call it, mottos, adages of test prep, and all things that we've developed over, I think this is our 28th, 27th, 28th year. Within that time, we've really developed this regimen, this SAT prep regimen, and you see it through the numbers. New Jersey has a very high average for the SAT in general, but our students will generally come in with that average around an 1100, 1200. I think that those are the numbers I generally see when they first come in. But when they leave, they almost always have something very, very close to their dream school 75th percentile, that 1500, that 1510, or even higher. They actually leave hungry, or they are hungrier for a higher score, and then we try our best to get them there. They usually do. So I also have the ACT scores here. For your reference, a 1500 and a 34. I think the two numbers are so different, but you can kind of see that those two kind of equate to one another. So 34, 33, 34 on the ACT will generally equate to about a 1500 on the SAT. So that's just for your reference. With those scores, our students go on up to really, really great colleges. This is actually last year's results. We don't have all of our this year's results just yet. But not only do our students get into really great programs, but they also get into a lot of wonderful honors colleges and get wonderful scholarships. I will tell you that the power of the SAT lies in honors colleges and scholarships, BSMD programs. So 7-year, 8-year medical programs, 3+3 law programs, they all like to see your SAT score. And so if you do have that really high SAT score, then not only are we looking at admissions to maybe your dream school, but also potentially a cheaper way to be there. The Dean Scholarship, it could be a scholarship program, it could be an honors college as well.